Good day from Tecolote Forest Farm. Today I'm going to talk about Korean natural farming KNF treatment types, formulation, and application with all of the many inputs that we make in KNF. I also make some alternatives that can be substituted in for some of the other inputs depending on what you have at your availability. I also use Jadam methodology as well. Now, I have a background in direct training with the Cho family, Master Cho and Youngsang Cho of Jadam. I've had the privilege of touring with the Cho family and really training from them directly, and I've gleaned a lot. For me, it's all about the underlying principles. If there's any system that we follow, it's the natural systems around us. So if we're observing the natural cycles that exist in plants, animals, out in nature, then we realize that they are cyclical. And this is really important when we take an approach to feeding our plants or animals. If you're doing animal husbandry, using these probiotics for animals and pets. It's important to keep in mind too, when we're doing Korean natural farming inputs and treatment types, as well as Jadam and these extracts as well, that they're really not intended to be a primary fertilizer. They're actually a secondary fertilizer. So our base fertilizers would be the compost that we're putting in the soil, the IMOs, indigenous microorganisms that we're inoculating into the soil. That is the real foundation of Korean natural farming and also Jadam. Jadam uses Jadam microbial solution. Korean natural farming uses a different method of IMO, culturing indigenous microorganisms. You can look for those two methods on my channel as well. And those inoculations of biology in the soil, now we're actually farming microorganisms, and really a lot of these inputs are feeding those communities and colonies of beneficial microorganisms in the soil. And in turn, there's the symbiosis, there's a mutualism happening between our plants and the biology. So it's really important to keep that in mind. If we're just feeding with these and we don't have soil biology, we might not have the best results. Many people think that these homeopathic doses are just not enough. And that might actually be the case if you haven't built up the fertility in your soil, that soil food web. So that's really crucial to this approach of living soil. So I really like to talk about that. We don't just want to generally use this feeding type in a real mechanical way and not think about the biology. This is all about supporting the biology. I've heard it said that Korean natural farming, and I think it applies to Jadam as well, that 70 to 80% of your success and 70 to 80% of the approach really has to do with those inoculations and that organic matter in the soil, making sure that that is balanced first. The other 30 to 20% of that is the foliar sprays, the secondary fertilizers that we're making. Now, I've done straight KNF feeds. I've also used straight Jadam. These days, for me, it's all about what tools work with the situation and where I'm at, the farm, the environment, what I'm dealing with around me, the plants that are showing up and the resources I have really, for me, determine the approach that I take. So that being said, I don't like to recommend a really mechanical approach to our SOP, right? Our standard operating procedure. I've worked for many farms and helped them convert to natural farming methods. And generally, you always have standard operating procedures. You have dates you put on the calendar, when we're going to feed, when we're going to, say, foliar spray, or do a soil drench, or do a pesticidal application if you're doing that, adding a inoculant. So the acronym SOP, Standard Operating Procedure, what I like to say is stop, observe, proceed. So what that suggests is that instead of going ahead mechanically with a date on a chart that we have put on our calendar that we're feeding on this day once a week, that's a good place to start maybe as a general plan, okay? But stop, observe, proceed is my SOP, because really this system, this natural farming system really requires that we really observe our plants. What are they communicating to us? What are they telling us that they need? This doesn't have to be some super esoteric thing. This is very practical. This is very much having a relationship with our plants where we're looking at them as living beings, not just mechanical objects that are producing something for us. So this is really important to an approach when we're working with natural systems and living organisms. Plants receive electromagnetic communications. They also transmit electromagnetic communications. So there is a communication that happens with plants, whether we're aware of it or not. Subconsciously, I think we are on a lot of levels. The nutritive cycle theory teaches us that in any respective stage of vegetation, transition, flower, or fruiting, there's different biochemistry. The plant's biochemistry is completely different depending on the time of year, the season, and what stage of growth that it's in. Recognizing these cycles in nature, these signatures and archetypes or morphotypes that exist, we can really take a practical approach to using these energetics and explain that through many different realms. For example, you could use a alchemical elemental correspondence, or we could just look at that as biochemistry. However you want to perceive that through whatever lens, these morphotypes are noticeable in nature, and those will fall into our feeding regiments at those respective cycles in our treatment types here. You can find this chart on my website, roguenaturalfarming.com. I have some good resources there that talk about, first of all, the inputs that we make in Korean natural farming, what they are, and also how to formulate those treatment types with those inputs. So there's a lot of resources on my website. Check that out. Today we're going to formulate with a type 2 treatment type, which is a vegetative growth treatment type. So this includes FPJ, fermented plant juices, at a rate of 1 to 500, which is 8 milliliters per gallon. A vegetative treatment type has plant juices or extracts that we extracted those plants at a time when those plants were in a vegetative state. They had that real fire element in them. And I'm going to sub in this plant extract I just made of purslane and ice plant here. I'm going to add that instead of FPJs. This is as concentrated as an FPJ. I'll use it at a rate of 8 milliliters per gallon. This includes brown rice vinegar at the same dilution, 8 milliliters per gallon. OHN, Oriental Herbal Nutrient, at half that rate, 4 milliliters per gallon. Okay, and also seawater, 1 to 30. If we take that seawater, we mix 1 part seawater with 30 parts water, we can use that, or we can actually use sea salt and dissolve that into solution. I've also added some optionals that are really helpful here in the treatment types. The other input that we can add in is humic and fulvic acids. We can find these from various different sources, or we can actually take the leachates from our worm bins for the source of humic fulvic acids, which are a fungi food. So this is a really great addition to a Korean natural farming formula. Once we know the stage of our plants, then we have a good idea of the formula type that we want to use, our treatment type here. So it's always good to be ahead of the curve in our treatment types. For example, when our plants are in a vegetative state and they're at the final end of that vegetative state growing up, and we know they're about ready to start budding, we want to be ahead of that. So we want to start using a transitional stage just before they actually start budding and go into transition. And really what that entails is adding calcium phosphate. So our CalPhos into the mix, which is really great for that transitional phase when the biochemistry is really changing in that plant from that vertical high nitrogen fire element now into that more lateral growth where it's putting on buds and starting to flower. Now it's going to need more calcium and calcium phosphate in those stages. For a transition, which we would use an FPJ that was made of unripened fruits, for example, or plants that were budding, for example. When we get to the later stages of plants, we have the reproductive formula, which also adds in this FPJ from baby fruit that was not fully ripe. So now we're getting those plant growth hormones from that unripened fruit. So then we have our ripening enhancement treatment type, which, as it suggests, we're using ripe fruit as a fermented fruit juice instead of a fermented plant juice. So again, it's very practically applicable, like for like, in all of these different treatment types. So one addition, for example, is WSK, water-soluble potassium. This isn't always listed on, say, the 9 core inputs of KNF. I think it really should just be added and be the 10th, really. But anyways, it's a good tool to have in your toolbox for creating bioavailable potassium for that stage, in the fruiting stage. Plants love a lot of potassium in that stage. So we can burn down the stalks of plants, things like sunflowers, for example, sunflower stalks. We could use a Dutch oven. A cast iron is a great way to do it. Put that over a fire and just cook it until it becomes an ash. And then what we can do is use distilled water to leach out that potassium that we have in the ash. Using a similar method with a cast iron, we can cook down eggshells or crushed oyster shells to a brown patina and then extract out the calcium with vinegar. This bioavailable calcium is great for lateral strength as well as hardening off density of fruit and flavor enhancement. If you don't have one of these inputs handy at the moment, that's fine. Just go ahead and use what you have at your fingertips at that time. I'm not a fertilizer salesman. I'm a teacher first and foremost, but I do offer my extracts and ferments on my website. They're small batch, limited editions, not always available and seasonal. First and foremost, I would like to teach people how to make these. You can see on my bottles here, it says make your own first, supplement second. And I offer these just to supplement and help people that are getting started, kick-started. So I'm here to support any way that I can. But first and foremost, I want to see farmers and gardeners making their own inputs with what they have available. What I've come to realize doing workshops in the regenerative farming community is that a lot of people get overwhelmed with their farms. There's a lot on their plate and we don't have a lot of time. We need to get these inputs made. We need to trust a trusted source. And we don't always have time to make all these inputs. So that's why I offer these, to support those type of friends and the community that need these inputs. So get together with some friends and make some big batches together so that you can share the burden, so to speak. And really, we don't have to see this as a burden. Really, this is a blessing that we have these plants and resources available at our fingertips. I'm really looking to support the small farmer being sovereign in their farming practices, to help save them money on resources and costs. For far too long, fertilizer companies have made a lot of money off of farmers and kept farmers broke. And really, we're taking our power back by recognizing that we can make these inputs ourselves and we can highly cut the costs. We can also produce really nutrient dense food and herbal medicine as well. So there's really two ways of feeding with our treatment types here, these inputs that we formulate. One is a soil drench and two is a foliar spray. In my last video where I was making plant extracts, I did a demo at the end of a simple garden root drench or soil drench with these treatment types. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate mixing a treatment type now for foliar application. Foliar feeding is the quickest way to feed plants, and it also helps your inputs to go much further than soaking them into the ground. You're going to use a lot more if you're doing soil drenches. Absolutely beautiful time of the evening, twilight, and this is really a great time to go out and foliar feed right when the sun has dropped behind the horizon, but it's still ambient light. This is a great time to go feed. The other great time to feed is early morning before the sun rises. So right before sunrise, right after sunset, great times to feed your plants. So we're gonna get out there and do a feed. As we talked about in the intro, we're doing a type 2 foliar feed here. That's a treatment type 2 KNF style. And we have all the inputs here. This is FAA, fish amino acids. So our ratio there is going to be 8 milliliters per gallon. This is a 5-gallon tank here on my still atomizer. So that would be 40 milliliters. These bottles offer a really nice way of measuring your inputs. So 40 mLs is right there at the top. So here we go. Next up, we have our OHN, Oriental Herbal Nutrient. That one is half the rate of the other inputs here. So that's a rate of 4 milliliters per gallon. So that would be 20 milliliters for a 5-gallon tank. There we go, that's all we need. Next up, we have our plant extract of purslane and ice plant. This will substitute for a fermented plant juice. That ratio is going to be the same as a fermented plant juice, which is 8 milliliters per gallon. So that's 40 mLs for this 5-gallon tank. Go. That's all we need. Brown rice vinegar, which I make my own cultures of brown rice vinegar. Make sure it has a mother culture, so there's some good lactobacillus, some good yeast, and some good biology in that as well. There's a lot of trace minerals in brown rice vinegar. Brown rice vinegar is also used at a rate of 8 mLs per gallon. There we go. Another addition we can do to bolster the growth in our plant cycle is add lactobacillus to the mix to add some more biology to the phytosphere. It also helps to keep in check pathogens that might exist. Last but certainly not least, we can add Jadam wetting agent to the mix. This is just going to help with the efficacy of our foliar sprays and really just optimize the amount of nutrients that are being absorbed by the plant. It's going to help with the coverage of the plants and help to deliver these nutrients. For any guidance on making Jadam wetting agent, you can see this video. All right, we got our mix. Our type 2 treatment is ready to go. Let's head out into the orchard. These avocados need some love. It's important to use an atomizer that gets a really fine mist so you can get full coverage and really optimize the feeding regimen that you're using and the absorption of the plant. So we want to cover the entire tree, the entire plant, the foliage, leaves, top and bottom, as well as the stems, the trunks, and the branches of the trees. I'm using Korean natural farming and Jadam techniques to remediate the soil and life, the biology and the soil food web here in the orchard, as well as feed these avocados. They haven't produced for the last 3 years, and this year we just started using KNF and Jadam here, and I'm committed to bringing back the health to the trees and the soil here. Feeding the guava trees as well. This still atomizer does a great job of coverage, so I don't have to spend too long on these trees. Typically I'm doing foliar feeds once a week in the orchard here, but I'm always paying attention to what the trees are expressing. There's a whole lot more footage to edit down, so stick with me, guys. And if you're liking the content, like, subscribe, share with a friend, and hit the bell for notifications. And as Master Choa once said, your farm and your garden is the university, and your plants are the professors.